Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In his name I begin. Salawatu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad and his holy family. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. We'd like to congratulate the Imam of our time for the blessed births of Al-Abbas alayhi salam, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam. And congratulations to our viewers for the upcoming birth of Imam Al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala sharaf, Farajah al-Sharif, inshaAllah. I'm Berak Hussain, registered psychotherapist, the Muslim counselor, and on behalf of the Islamic Shia Ithna Ashariya Association of Edmonton, ISIA, we'd like to welcome you to The Mindful Muslim. It's an online series with monthly episodes exploring mind-provoking discussions with special guests on topics relevant to you. We'll be looking at all sorts of topics discussing social, psychological, cultural, mental health, religious, familial, and current matters. Today's session will be exploring the topic of death, trying to understand and coping with the loss of a loved one. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in Al-Imran. Every soul shall taste death. And while it's an inevitable part of life, something that all of us will go through at some point, losing someone you love can, of course, be one of the most painful experiences you'll ever have to endure. Whether it's a close friend, spouse, partner, parent, child, or another relative, a few things are as painful as losing someone that you love. After such a significant loss, life may never seem quite the same again. And whatever your relationship is with the person who passed away, it's important to remember that we all grieve in different ways. There's no one single way to respond. When you lose someone important in your life, it's okay to feel how you feel. Some questions that come to mind that we will be covering today, such as, will the pain ever go away faster if you ignore it? If you don't cry, does it mean that you are not grieving? How long should the grieving last? If I move on with my life, does it mean that I forgot about my loss? How do you deal with a disfranchised grief? Where do you seek support for grief? Should one reach out and support others dealing with the loss? Would that be looked upon favorably, or is that an intrusion? And so before doing so, we're going to get into the myths and facts about grief and grieving. Now, joining us today, inshallah, to explore this in more depth is Sister Zahra Al-Alawi. She's a TV presenter, author, journalist, and public speaker. A little bit of info about my dear friend Zahra. She has graduated from a media and television degree at the University of Hertfordshire in England, as well as being personally tutored by Islamic scholars and lecturers. She's been presenting and lecturing globally for over 14 years, and she has lectured and chaired conferences around the United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, Dar es Salaam, Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait. Her TV talk show Woman's View on Sky 831 broadcasted over 300 episodes interviewing a range of women. Zahra has also appeared on British media channels such as the BBC, ITV3, and Channel 4, speaking on Islamic issues. She's also been quoted in The Telegraph and the Independent news articles. Zahra had a meeting a while back with the British Prime Minister in 2016 at 10 Downing Street, where she projected to him the achievements of British Muslim women. Welcome, dear Zahra.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
I know this is a very close topic to you, given your very public and brave sharing of your grief that you've experienced in the last few months, Zahra. So, inshallah, let's get right into the topic. And for those who are joining us, you can also send in your questions live while watching on the YouTube channel. So, Zahra, I know you and I have chatted about this over the last few months, and I know you've been very public in your grief and showing with the loss of your father. First of all, on behalf of ISAIA and myself and all those who respect and love you, we give our condolences to you for the passing of your father. I know from what we've learned about your father through you, was such a great man, mashallah, a father, a husband, a grandfather, and so much more to so many. And the love that you shared over the last few months from your grief showed so much. And I remember when you and I chatted about it, we said that perhaps we can share this with others in a very constructive manner, in a way that people can benefit from this, because this is a topic we shy away from. We shy away from the topic of death because there's fears around it. People don't understand it. And I remember when we talked about it, you said this grieving actually made you closer to God. It actually helped you, and it put things into perspective for you. And I always, whenever I talk about death, whether it's in counseling, whether it's discussions, philosophical, spiritual, I always say that we're all going to taste it, as the Quran says. We're all going to experience it personally, other amongst the people we know, but we're going to experience it in the sense of we don't know when, we don't know how, but it's going to happen. And it's something that we do need to become comfortable talking about. And it's encouraged in our faith to talk about it. So let's get started with this discussion around it in terms of grief, but just death in general. And we'll see where the discussion goes, because it's always nice to go organic with it. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you some questions in the form of myths, and then we'll have a discussion. For those who are watching, then you could join in as well. So this myth here, the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, first of all, assalamu alaikum to you, Sister Barak. We've had great discussions about this topic, and I also want to send my condolences to everyone out there that has lost a loved one. I think, especially in recent times, we have been seeing more frequent deaths and very sad deaths, very unexpected deaths,
Yes.
traumatic deaths of young souls as well in our community, and it's very, very sad to see that. But more so than ever, I think Sister Barak touched upon this, that we need to discuss the topic of death. We need to discuss the topic of grief, because every single one of us, no matter who we are, we're going to go through the process of grief during our lifetime, you know. And in my case, I lost my father 5 months ago, and it was a shock. This whole losing someone, burying someone that you loved so much. Like, me and my father were so close, so close. So when he passed away, it was a shock. Like, how can someone be so close to you and suddenly go? So I think it's very important that we discuss the topic of grief, because we're all going to go through it. Every single one of us will lose our parent one, you know, during our lifetime. Unless we die before them, we're going to go through that process where we see our parent die, we see their body lifeless, we see them getting buried. So we're going to go through this journey of grief, of losing a loved one during our lifetime. So it's very important that we discuss it. Um, so I believe the myth that Sister Barak said is, if we ignore the pain, will it go faster? And I think it's a great myth, because first of all, let's make it very clear that grief is not a bad thing. Many people look at grief as if grief and grieving is a bad thing, and I think that's why many people try to avoid it. Because, you know, the question is, why do people avoid grief? Why would we avoid the process of grief? Number one is, it could be that the pain is so overwhelming that you just don't want to face it. You don't want to go through it. And another reason is because perhaps grief has been presented to us in such a bad way, when grief is very healthy. And I can only speak from my own experience that going through the process of grief has actually made me stronger. I think the whole process of my father and his illness and his death has made me very, very strong. Because if I'm able to face that, I perhaps can face everything, anything that comes my way. So it's important that, number one, I would say anyone that kind of tries to avoid grief, is that we need to be very patient with ourselves. We need to kind of let this process take out naturally. Be very patient with yourself. Just let it play out. And sometimes we try to move on to the next step, or we try to think we need to feel this way or need to feel this way. Just let it progress very naturally. So rather than ignoring it or trying to rush it or trying to feel like you need to feel a certain way, just let it go very naturally. Um, and I believe that there is a very healthy and there's a very unhealthy form of grief. And I think if we ignore it, that is the whole process of grief will pan out to be a very unhealthy experience. Because if we ignore it, the more we ignore it, the more unhealthy it would be. So, and in reality, you know, no one wants to be sad. No one wants to feel sadness, or go through sadness, or go through this very uncomfortable pain and heartache and discomfort. So some people may try to avoid it, but it's very healthy to just, you know, experience the process.
Absolutely, and trying to ignore that pain can keep or keep it from coming to the surface, it only makes it worse in the long run, right? Because for that real healing, it's really necessary to face your grief and to actively deal with it, and perhaps understanding the stages of grief. And so psychologically, we take a look at it from this angle. There's the first part, which is that denial and shock, where the initial thought would be, this can't be happening to me. This is not true. No, that person didn't die, right? And then perhaps Zahra, you probably perhaps went through this as well. And the next stage perhaps could be anger, where the question is, why is this happening to me? Who's to blame? Why did this happen? I know from a psycho-spiritual Islamic perspective, we always say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We are from him and to him we return. So perhaps not as much in terms of anger there, because we accept it as a part of life, right? But perhaps still when it's a sudden death or a shocking death, perhaps there is that anger. It's like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And then there's that bargaining phase, the negotiating phase, where you're negotiating with your environment, so to speak, like saying things like, may this not happen, and in return, I will do this. So you're almost like negotiating with God or perhaps the environment, right? But then perhaps you get into the next phase of depression, sadness, right? I'm too sad to do anything physically, emotionally. You don't want to engage or do anything because of that sadness. But then you get to that place of acceptance afterwards, right? Where I'm at peace with what happened. I've accepted what happened. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So perhaps, these are the usual stages of grief that people tend to experience. And there's not one way or a specific amount of time that it should be. Everybody experiences it at a different pace in a different way. And also, I guess it depends on your upbringing, your belief, your outlook on life. Wouldn't you say, Zahra?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's different emotions that we go through. I personally don't believe on the kind of the steps of, because I feel like, grief pans out very differently for everyone. Some people may not go through the emotion of anger or depression. I didn't go through depression. I don't believe I did. I went through unbelievable grief, yes, but uh,
Sadness. Yeah.
yeah, and sadness. So yeah, I do believe that there's a wide range of emotions that people go through. It's like a roller coaster, like up and down.
Exactly. Now, in terms of another myth here, it's important to be strong in the face of loss. What are your thoughts with that, Zahra? It's important to be strong, have that face and not show emotion. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I feel like, what is the definition of strong? What's the definition? And grieving and crying is not a weakness, and I want to really emphasize on that. To grieve is not a weakness. In fact, it's very healthy to grieve. And crying is usually seen as a sign or an emotion which, perhaps is attached with weakness, but it's not. We saw that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they grieved, they cried, and they're the most strongest personalities that we could ever have or we could ever look up to. But they grieved, they cried. Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, when her father passed away, she was wailing and crying that even the people in the city were saying, we can't sleep because she's crying so much. So sometimes we need to define, what do we consider as being weakness and what do we consider as being strong. Grieving is not a weakness, and that's why to be honest, I was very public with how I felt, and I think that's perhaps the way I dealt with my father's illness. I mean, my father's death, is that I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to show people my how I was feeling. And even with, when we sit down with my family members, I'm very vocal with my mother. I'm very vocal with my sisters. I always talk about my father and his death and what was experienced. So I think when we take even the lessons of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we saw that, to grieve is not a sign of, which doesn't mean that you are weak. And even the prophets in the Holy Quran, they grieved when Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, when his father thought that something had happened to him, he grieved until he was blind. So, crying is not, some people think if we don't cry or if we kind of avoid the process of grief, then we're going to be strong for our family members, we're going to be strong for ourselves. But that's not the case at all. We need to experience the process of grief. And it's actually very interesting because here in the UK, statistics show that the males aged between 45 to 49 continue to have the highest rates of suicide in the UK. Men in the UK kill themselves way, way, way more than women. And in fact, one of the main channels in the UK, was it ITV, they do a whole campaign about this annually. Every year they do a campaign about this where they say that men need to regulate their emotions because our society believe that men should be strong, men shouldn't cry, men should, be really strong for their family members. Trying to avoid the aspects of grief or the emotions, in fact, lead a lot of men to then commit suicide. So we should never try to block out our emotions or block out these very natural processes like grief. So I think where some people think that we shouldn't cry, we should be strong for our family members and be the strong ones, that's not the case at all, because you're perhaps being strong for everyone else, but you're not being strong for yourself. You're not being strong for your inner self. So I personally think that crying is a very important part of grieving. It is kind of an outlet of your emotions. And I think that I was very strong for my family members, for my children, but at the same time, I did kind of let the process of grief pan out itself. So you can be strong at the same time, kind of experience grief.
Absolutely, and I'm full agreement with you, Zahra, when we take a look at how the examples of the Ahlul Bayt Salamullah alayhim, where they expressed emotions. And like you said, they are the strongest of examples that we have to look up to, and they exemplified that. They show that you can still be a person of faith and believe in, God has taken back what he has put forth, but at the same time, show that expression of loss and pain and normalizing that it's okay to show your pain. And I think if you just look at our majalis, we're encouraged to cry at the majalis. And I always talk about grief and the benefits of the majlis, but also the benefits of that tear that comes down. There are toxins that are released in our tears that help us feel a little bit more relieved, right? And like we were saying, feeling sad, frightened, or lonely, it's a normal reaction to loss. Crying does not mean that you are weak. It is normal. It is common. And the idea that you mentioned, that you don't need to protect your family or friends by putting up this so-called brave front, especially as males, where they're conditioned in our society to not show emotions, which then could lead to leaving those emotions inside, which can cause that depression, which can then get to that phase of potentially having suicidality. And the statistics show how harshly men take their lives when it comes to dealing with this kind of depression, right? So it's really important to show your true feelings, which can help you, but also help the people around you. So it's important to normalize that. And especially in the context as Muslims, like we said, it's okay to show that expression of grief. Again, we just need to look at the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet and each Imam and the ladies of light, like they demonstrated that. They demonstrated grief of their loss, yet they still stayed strong when standing up for injustice, when they're standing up for their rights. They were still in the process of grief, but they were doing something at the same time. And that's really inspirational, right? Like they didn't put up a front, so to speak. They were still in pain. They were still expressing emotion, but they were still doing what they had to do. That is strength. That is absolute strength right there. Yeah, thank you, Zahra, for bringing up those points. And as you were talking, I remembered the last few months of your public expression of grief. I remember I was actually in Karbala on the day of Arba'een when you had posted about your father, and instantly my grief for your loss came into play, so to speak, double that day, because we were grieving on the day of Arba'een. But also for you, especially because I knew for the last year or so how hard it has been for you and your family with your father's illness, in and out of the hospitals, and we're always in contact. And at the same time, there's almost this sense of relief that he's no longer in pain.
Mm.
I remember you were saying how much in pain he was.
Yeah, it's not more so of he wasn't in actual pain, but it was obviously the illness
Yeah.
was really, really my father, his illness. I mean, I've never seen someone have that much illness, but surprisingly, he was never actually in pain,
Alhamdulillah.
which is really something that was really unusual, because sometimes even the doctors will come, they're like, something's not adding up, where all the tests were coming. For example, my father had kidney failure, he had heart failure, he had a collapsed lung. So not even, I mean, kidney failure to the highest degree, it was stage 5. So, he had kidney failure, heart failure, had 2 strokes, he had diabetes, he had all these illnesses, but he was never in pain, which was really
Alhamdulillah.
and very
Almost
unusual.
miraculous. Almost miraculous, you could say.
Yeah, so sometimes the doctors would say, he was like, we begin to doubt ourselves. Like, and usually someone that has kidney failure, they're one of the symptoms is they're very drowsy, they're not alert, they're not awake. My father will be having conversations with the doctors, he'll be speaking to them, he'll be calling us up, and it was kind of like something's not adding up. So I didn't believe he was going to die. I mean, they did tell us that he has
Mm.
reached end of life
I
a
remember you
month
telling me
before.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Wow.
I didn't believe it because he didn't seem like someone that had reached end of life. I don't know. I
Right.
assumed that if someone had reached end of life, they'll be very they will look like they're dying. He never looked like he was dying. He was always like social. I mean, just days before he died, he was ordering food from restaurants. He was eating. So
Bless his soul.
he never seemed like he was dying. So even when they told us, I was like, no, he's not. Like, there's no
Mm.
way he's dying. That's not
SubhanAllah.
someone dying. If someone's having jokes with us, he was playing with my daughter, he was joking about with me. So it's very interesting how everything panned out. But subhanallah, I think God gives strength in these moments. Like, we look back now and we're thinking, how were we joking and laughing in those moments when he's dying? Because
SubhanAllah.
he was joking with us. And even my mum said, we never felt like he was terminal because I don't know,
He had
anyone
a
that,
joie de vivre, it sounds like the way you're describing, a joy of life despite the fact that he was ending, like his life was ending, like the doctors told you.
yeah, yeah. He never seemed like he was dying, to be honest. Even he was calling people in Bahrain. He called, there's a sheikh in Bahrain called Sheikh Abdul Azim al Muhtadi. Everyone that knows the Bahrain would know. So he was calling Sheikh Abdul Azim and he was telling him they were just trying to set up a mosque in Bahrain, opening a mosque. He was calling donors in Kuwait. So he
God
never
bless
seemed
him.
like he was dying, but God chose to take his soul on the day of Arba'in, and that's it.
SubhanAllah, what a day. What a day to go back to your Lord.
Yeah.
So symbolic of all days. SubhanAllah.
Yeah. No, in
Mhm.
fact, I have to mention this. He kept talking about going to Ziyara on Arba'in.
Allah.
He kept saying that. He said, I'm going to Ziyara. And we're like, are you? And I remember he called me from the kitchen. He said, Zahra, come. I have to tell you something. And I said, what is it? He goes, guess. And I said, and my mom was standing in the kitchen. I said, what is it? And he said, I've got to tell you. I said, what? He said, I'm going on Ziyara on the day of Arba'in. I said,
SubhanAllah.
yeah. And I looked at him. I was like, are you? And he's like,
Goosebumps thinking about that.
yeah, so he was like, "Yeah, I am." And then even in when he was in hospital in Muharram, Sayyid Mehdi al-Mudarrisi visited him. We actually have a video footage of this. Sayyid Mehdi al-Mudarrisi visited him in the hospital, and he told him, "Sayyid, we're going to be doing. Shall we do ziyarah on your behalf in Karbala?" He goes, "No, no, no, because I'm going there."
Going there.
Yeah, and then
SubhanAllah.
yeah, and the same Hindu was like, "Oh, are you going there?" He goes, "Yeah, I've decided I'm going to go on Ziyara and Arba'in." We actually have video footage. I will, I can send it to you. And yeah, so he said that he said it to everyone, and I guess that's what happened. He traveled on Arba'in, but it was a different type of travel.
That's amazing. That he it's as though he knew he was going. Have you heard these stories? This is a little bit off our direct topic here, but I think it's really related, and a lot of people can connect to this. We've heard these stories, is that those who are about to die, they almost give signs as though they're going to die with the way they
Yeah,
behave or the things that they say. What you
yeah,
said about your father, Allah yarhamah, the Sayyid, is so indicative of stories that we've heard of many people. Before
yeah,
they pass on, they act or say, it's almost as though they were ill for a while and then they wake up and they're all strong and revived, and you think that nothing's wrong with them, and then all of a sudden you hear that they pass away, or they say or do something that shows something spiritual like that. What are your thoughts
yeah.
on that, Zara?
No, definitely. In fact, the doctor told us this. He said that he's not religious. He's not a Muslim, and he said that there's some souls that they kind of they sense this sense of traveling, the sense of what's going to happen, and yeah, and they give signs to it. My father said a lot of things that gave signs to it. A lot of things, like he would say, for example, he's traveling. Even he's a trustee of one of the major Hussainiyas in London, and they were in the process of signing the they're selling their Husseiniya. So the Rasulullah, they were selling their mosque. And my dad used to sign papers because he's one of the trustees and the board members. And I remember one of the main guys, they came to my house, my father's house, to sign papers. And my father told him that I'm traveling. So next time you come, I may not be here. And me and my mum were next door, and my brother were like, he's telling him that he's traveling. Like, oh my God, like, is he traveling? So it was kind of like confusing. And he told him, I'm not going to be here. I'm traveling. And that was it. I mean, after that visit, he was gone. So he said a lot of stuff. Like I can speak about this for probably an hour, but there's a lot of things he said that I wish I could make these things up. But he was saying stuff that At that time, you don't think anything of it. But out of 360, God knows how many days in a year, that on that specific day that he said he was going to travel in is when God chose to take his soul. So it was a lot of things, even about washing his body. He was saying stuff like, so the last time he had a shower in my parents' house. Sorry, this is completely off track.
No, but
But
this is really valuable for those who are trying to make peace and understand what was happening around
yeah,
their own loved ones, or even those who are experiencing family members who are dying, to watch for these things. Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
So even when last time he had a shower in the house, he was telling my mom, I need to have a shower outside. Like there's a toilet outside. I need them to wash my body outside. And my mom
Wow.
was like, we thought that because they told us that if you reach the end stage of kidney failure, then you may say stuff that don't make sense. So we just put it to that. And my mom told him, there's no bathroom outside. We have a bathroom here and we have a bathroom upstairs. There's no bathroom outside. He goes, no, I know there's a bathroom outside. I need to wash my
Wow.
body outside. So we were like, and then after my mom called me because she was alone, she said, Zahra, please tell her. She called my sister Fatima, not me. She called my sister Fatima. She told her, can you tell your father there's only two bathrooms here? So she told him, Baba, there's only two bathrooms. And he was like, mom said he was like, what? Like, I'm sure they're going to wash my body outside. He had that shower that week. The next week, they washed his body in the Muhtasan. And
Subhanallah.
I remember standing outside and I could see the Muhtasan. I was like, oh my God, this is the bathroom outside. Because I was standing in the streets, but outside. And then you could see like inside where they were washing his body. And he was like laid on the table. And I was like, oh my God, this is what he was saying, that they're going to wash my body outside. This is where they're
Wow.
washing it. So, yeah.
That's pretty powerful if you think about it, because you make the connections after, not
Yeah,
during
not during.
the
You
time
wouldn't think
frame. It doesn't
anything
make
of it.
sense during.
Even him telling everyone about traveling and we didn't think anything of it. It's until afterwards you're like, wait a minute, like how did that happen?
Subhanallah. Wow. And so, Zahra, looking back at those signs, how did that help you in the grieving process?
It really made me realize, and I say this to everyone has a chosen day, and sometimes we believe someone was taken too early or taken too late. There's people that feel like they've outlived their time as well. I remember speaking to my next door neighbor. She's telling me the same thing after my father passed away. She goes, I've outlived my time. It's been too much.
Mm.
Sometimes we think someone was taken too early or someone was taken too late or someone's suffering for so long. Like, why doesn't God take their soul? They're suffering. But we all have a chosen date that's written for us. And I think when you come to that realization, it's everyone has a chosen date, and that is the time they go. And I think, experiencing all that with my father, it did make the kind of grieving process easier, because he was so looking forward to traveling on Al-Ba'in. He was so looking forward to it. And he kept saying it to everyone. So when it happened, it's like, oh my, like, I remember when he died, I'm like, his soul's not even here. He's gone to Karbala. Like, he's gone. So it just made the kind of the process easier. But I think anyone that goes through the process of grief, sometimes it could be very traumatic, very sudden, very unexpected, is just to realize that everyone has a chosen time. And I came to that realization afterwards, is that's his chosen time. And he's not dead, They just hop onto the other side of and continue on their life. And there's a veil between us, but they never truly die. And I think just him talking about that process before and then afterwards, and even, by the way, anyone that has lost a loved one will tell you they come to you in the dreams afterwards. And I truly believe that.
Have you had that experience with your father yet?
Yeah, I had a dream straight after, because I was, and strangers from the internet were sending us messages and dreams. And I remember someone sent me WhatsApp conversations, a sister, of her discussing with other people, of her dreaming about my father. And it made so much connections to what we were, like, she doesn't know us. She doesn't know what we spoke about personally. And there were so many connections. And it's like, how did this person dream that when she doesn't know us? So, yeah, he did come to me, and I saw him and hugging people, laughing, smiling. Towards the end of my father's life, he couldn't walk, so I saw him walking, and I think that brought a lot of comfort.
Subhanallah. Zahra, as you're speaking this, I'm remembering some of our loved ones that have passed on over the years, my cousin, my uncle. And I remember seeing my cousin after he had passed, but he didn't look very good. Like he looked sad because he was very young and he had young children. My uncle, Allah yarhama, I remember my aunt, his sister, was saying how she saw his grave and it was a light. It was filled
Wow.
with light, and he was a very well loved, devout man. So subhanallah, all of these things, I truly believe a lot of
Yeah.
these things help in the grieving process, and I see that with my own people that come in for sessions when they're dealing with grief. Some experience that sudden loss where they're not prepared for it. You,
Yeah.
in a way, I remember when we chatted, you said, although you felt you were in that phase of, oh, he's not going to die, he looked okay and healthy, you were told it was end of life. So the part of you was almost preparing for it. A lot of people don't get that, where it's a
My
sudden death. And
grieving,
we
my
experience
grieving, yeah, my grieving started 2 years ago when he fell.
that's
So
it, right? So your
yeah,
grieving started at the time when you knew he was ill.
yeah,
Yes.
for 2 years I've been grieving. 2 years, every time we go to the hospital, every time we see him, every time we hear a news from the doctors, it was like it was just kind of like this very. Every time you hear a doctor say something, the results showed this. It was like like a bus hits you, and there's grief. So even when he passed away, people, they were messaging me, "Oh, Zahra, I know you're grieving," and I was thinking, I'm grieving 2 years now. This is not
Not
now.
new, not now.
Yeah. So
And that's it, is that people, with the loved ones around them, they don't expect when they leave the house not to come back. Although this is an interesting mentality, because I've seen, for example, in Iraq, a war-torn country, so to speak, and especially at the time when there was a lot of attacks and terrorist attacks there, I would hear the language my family would say there along the lines of, we don't know our family leaving in the morning if they're going to be coming back at night. So that's that dread, but acceptance of that's the way life is, right? It's almost a preparedness. And sure enough, a few years ago, there was an attack, a bombing where one of our cousins, her husband was in it. And it's devastating to experience a sudden loss like that, especially a tragic loss. Like you said, recently there's been two big deaths in our communities, and our Muslim Shia communities in London, where it was a sudden death of a very well loved, respected person. And it's hard to accept at first, because it's like, well, they're so young.
yeah,
How could this happen? Those questions again in the phases of death, perhaps, again, not everybody goes through them in that chronological order, but the questions come up. Why? How? Yes, we all have that time, so to speak, but that sudden death is,
yeah,
especially, let's say somebody, and we've seen this, who take their lives and by suicide, that leaves a lot of confusion. That brings up a lot of questions, as well. And perhaps this is a topic for another day, but the idea of that sudden death, not the way the death happened. We'll talk
mm,
about perhaps suicide another time in our community, but that idea of that sudden death, how do you prepare for that? How do you deal with that? And I think our faith really helps us, especially with what you said along the lines of, this is a phase of life.
yeah,
It is not the end. Like you said, there's that thin barrier, a layer of the world that we're living in, this dunya we world, this materialistic world. And these are our beliefs as Muslims. Obviously, other people have different beliefs, but
yeah,
this is what helps us deal with death, is understanding that we are here in this temporary plane. How do we choose to live this life here? Because there comes a point, let's say, for example, this is the end for us here. What happens after?
yeah,
Like you said, your father's alive in this world,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And because you see, mashallah, on your face, you're not typically the person who's showing grief in the sense of sadness. There's a smile on your face when you talk
yeah.
about your father. I personally believe that has a lot to do with your faith and your understanding of life and death. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think what also helped is my father used to always talk about death all the
Mhm.
time to us since we were little, and I think that's why it's helpful to talk about it. So I'm so happy that you're doing shows like this, because we need to talk about it. It shouldn't be a topic that we don't. And my father used to always say to all my siblings will say the same thing. He used to always tell us, you haven't been created for this life. You've been created for the hereafter. And having
Ahsan.
that yeah, that's so having that realization is like we haven't been created for this. This is so temporary. Like you said, of people in Iraq, they feel like, if we leave, are we even going to come back? I think that's a mentality we should all have. We're not
Absolutely.
guaranteed. Lots of young people that have died in this previous week, they've left their houses, got in their cars or on their bicycles or on their motorcycles, and
Yeah.
never returned, because this is not our home. This our home is not our final home, and we could leave this temporary home anytime and then be literally taken to our
Final abode. Yeah.
final abode. So we should always have that at the back of our mind. And I think when we listen to stories that have people have died, even condolences to everyone in Pakistan. Oh my God, someone showed me a video today.
Horrific. Allahu Akbar.
Yeah. Someone
The
showed me a video
innocence.
and I was like, please do not show me. Like I can't watch that. And it was like men all in one row that were all lying down, all have passed away. My condolences to them all because
Yeah.
it's so tragic. And that's where my heart grieves for people that have really witnessed tragic deaths of a loved one. It's really, really hard. That's why everyone's grieving process is different because
Of course.
it's different to the age, to the relationship, to the cause of death. I think with our process, we weren't in terms of shock. I don't think we were in shock. Obviously, death is always a shock, by the way.
Yes, of
No
course.
matter how it was like, even when it happened, even though we were told it was happened, just when it happened, it's a shock. It's like a shock. So I cannot even imagine people that have gone through just
Sudden, yeah, that sudden
very
death.
sudden traumatic deaths like killing and bombing. God help them. But I think just having that realization is that when we haven't been created for this, and I think that for this world. So when a loved one passes away, they haven't gone, they haven't died, they've just gone to the other world. And it's just, that's how I felt with my father, because the night he died, I was actually sleeping over in their house. So my dad had kind of deteriorated, so I packed my bags and I was like, I'm going to sleep in my parents' house, I'm going to help them. And I packed a bag for the kids so Amir could take them to school. And then I came to my parents' house, and that's the day he died. It was the day of Al-Bain. And then in that morning, I had put in the washing machine his clothes. And yeah, and so when he okay, I shouldn't be talking about this too much because I am. Yeah, so
Whatever you're comfortable with.
yeah. So when he passed away, I remember at night I was brushing my teeth and I went past the washing machine and I was like, oh my God, his clothes is it? Like I washed his clothes in the morning. And it's just scary how you can just leave everything that you own. Like my dad's car is still parked outside the house, and it's like his room. I'm in their house, by the way, now, so that's why I'm hiding in a room. His room next door still has his books, his belongings, his rings, and it makes you realize that whatever we own in this world is not ours.
Coming with us. It's not coming with us.
Nothing's coming with us. We're just going to leave everything. Like now, I go sit in his room sometimes and open. Like I saw he used to write a lot of poetry. I opened his books. It just makes you realize that no one's been created. No one's staying. Like I wish I could have saved my father, but I can't even save myself. I'm not guaranteed to stay. I'm not staying here anyway in this world. So it just makes you realize that we're all going one day.
Well, that's it too, right? Is that we are each responsible for our deeds and our souls, because what are you going to take from this world into the next? Recently, we had a family member here in Ottawa suddenly pass away, and he was young, healthy, only 57 years old, a cousin. And suddenly, his wife, we found out like it was the end of the weekend, and my brother sent us a message. I was getting ready for sleep Sunday night, and he sent a message, and as we read it, I thought it was his mother, who was an elderly woman, and just my heart stopped. Like, oh my God, her time has come. And then I reread the message, and it wasn't her, it was her son, which was a complete shock. And we just all got into our cars at like midnight, ran over to their house, and the mother was asleep. She had no clue what was going on. The wife was in tears. She had just come back from the hospital, and the two girls were in hysterics. And it just never hit. Like it was a sudden death, right? And we were absolutely in shock, but there were things that had to be done. There was the funeral, there was the ghusl, there was the janaza, there was the majlis, there was cleaning up the house because people were coming. It was just all these things that boom, boom, boom you had to do. And there was no really time, to process everything that it had to be done. And it's family, you're there to help, right? Get things going and do things. And throughout that whole week, a lot of thoughts were coming through my head because I suddenly had to stop work. I was there daily. I think I stayed at their house for like 3-4 days in a row without even knowing the time, how it went by. But you're just there for each other, right? Supporting each other, doing all the stuff so that they can process, right? And it occurred to me, I don't know if you've noticed this before, and anybody who's watching, I'd like to hear your comments on this, is that if you notice in our cultural family gatherings, whether it is a funeral for somebody who's passed or a wedding, it's almost identical in terms of preparations, in
Mm.
terms of food, in terms of that, but you're wearing black, you're wearing joyful colors. It's a happy occasion, you're a sad occasion, but people are still there. They're still
Mm.
there all around. They're there to support. And even during this time, there's still laughter. There's still jokes, I noticed. And I noticed in Iraq too, when we experience death within our families, there's a time, during the majlis and during the certain things that it's almost the way people grieve and deal with things, right? And then afterwards, when it's just family, there's jokes and laughter about the person and all these types of things. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I personally have seen this in whether it's my family or friends. And it's so interesting to see that process of grief. And again, seeing what things had to be done to get things done on time, especially because the body has to be washed and put into the grave. And I know, Zahra, you experienced watching your father being put into the grave, right? Like you were there at the time.
I did go, but I didn't go to the gravesite. No, I
Okay.
was about 5 minutes away. So like you said, after someone dies, it's like go 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 go.
Yeah,
It's obviously
you have to deal with it right away.
yeah, you have to deal with it. You're just thrown into. I don't even know what happened when the minute he passed away. If you ask me what happened, I don't know. I can't remember
Yeah.
packing my bags. Can't remember packing my daughter's bags. My daughter came with me. Can't remember packing my kids' bag because they stayed here and they stayed over at my sister-in-law's housemate. Allah bless her. She was very kind to look after them. Um, I can't remember any of it because it's go go
Yeah,
go. You have
it's a
to.
blur.
My father passed away here. We had to take him internationally. We had to travel with him. It was just with international travels, you have to
It was
register the.
COVID time too.
It was Alhamdulillah. That's the thing. I was like, God was so merciful because when my father got ill, it was lockdown the month after. So he had fallen
Mm,
and
mm.
gone very ill. The next month it was lockdown, and I told my dad, once you got ill, the whole world got ill. With I used to always joke with
Allah.
him. I used to always tell him that. I'm like, Baba, when you got ill, the whole world got ill with you. But the thing is, the way Allah timed it, trust me, this is why I know that I put my full trust in Allah. The way He planned everything out, because we were all working full time. We had kids to drop off. When my father got ill, we all jumped into action to care for him. We wouldn't be able to do that if the world was still going on as it was. So lockdown happened, and then we all kind of, the life stopped for everyone. So we were there for him. We were there every single day for him,
God
because of
bless
that.
you.
Alhamdulillah, when he passed away, COVID restrictions were lifted, which made it so much easier for international travel, and especially international burial as well. They told us if it had died few months before, you wouldn't have been able to kind of taken him abroad. So yeah, like you said, it is go 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 go. I did go with him to Bahrain on the same aeroplane. I did go to his tashir, to his ghusl, to his
Yeah.
everything. But the last minute, we didn't go to the actual burial site. And I am going to share his kind of janaza and his burial because I know that he would want people to remember death. But it was so peaceful. And I think if us women were there, it would have been too much crying and too much kind of hectic. But we were 5 minutes away, but not at the actual graveyard.
And that's an interesting thing, the actual burial and into the grave. And I remember when we were watching our cousin, my father and my brother went into the grave to place him. And it was so surreal watching his wife and kids. His mother was in the car. It was in the middle of winter here, snow. We couldn't get close. Like we didn't want the hajjiyah to come out. But watching that whole process really forces you to look at your own life,
Yes.
because this is your resting place until the day of
Mhm.
judgment,
Yeah.
essentially. What are you going to take with you there? And I was watching, like I said, my father, my brother helping him, and I've seen him in real life sitting with them together. It was so surreal watching, and then even looking down and saying, my brother's going to be there one day, my father's going to be there one day, I'm going to be there one day, we're all going to, this is where we are. What are we going to do to get to that point when that happens? Are we going to leave mardiya, as the ayah in the Quran, the word in the Quran says? Like, are we going to be leaving pleased with ourselves, this world? It really puts things into perspective. My brothers and sisters and I were joking but serious, like, guys, get your wills ready, clean out. I was thinking, I need to clear out my house. If anything happens to me, I don't want my brothers and sisters dealing with my house. My brother's like, listen, and like, we've got morbid humor, but I think as Arabs, Iraqis, Muslims, Shias, whatever, we always use humor in death or in any situation. He's like, listen, Barak, if anything happens to you and your house is not ready, we're gonna bring homeless people in your house. They can take whatever they want. Like,
Yeah,
like just cracking that joke, but it puts things into perspective. How are you gonna leave this world? It really
exactly. Yeah.
makes you think about it, right?
Mm,
My goodness, people, like your relationships with people, your
yeah.
relationship with yourself and God. When this is it. There was almost a sense of like when we watched the tarab, the dirt being covered over the cement, and he's down there. We're like, he's down there. Like he's down
Yeah.
there, he's there, and then the 6 feet under, so to speak, expression. And then we just put roses on top, and it's like, that's it. He's gone.
Yeah. It's
Now what?
it's
Now
surreal.
what? It is surreal. But there's almost this sense of we've given him back to God kind of thing. Like he's in God's hands,
Yeah.
acting in God's hands. But then everything happens after the family. How are they going to go on without this person? And this is what we're exploring today, because that part, like you said, is such a blur. It's such a shock to deal with all of it. And then you have to deal with the technical aspects, the real life. You are left to deal with the
Yeah.
will, the estate, the money, the property. And like you said, you're in your father's house now and you're next door to his room. His stuff is all here, but he's physically not here. He's with you
Mm,
in spirit, right? And so let's get back a little bit on track in terms of that. In terms of, for example, if you don't cry, as a
mm,
myth, if you don't cry, it means you're not sorry about the loss.
mm.
What are your thoughts about that? Because some people don't show that, right? Or they don't know.
Yeah, with crying, I think everyone, first of all, we have to understand that everyone grieves differently. And I saw this with myself. So my father had 10 daughters, we had 10 girls, and each one of us completely different. Complete, the way we grieve was completely different. Some of us are very vocal and cry in front of everyone. And even at his funeral and burial, some of us were very vocal. We were crying so loud. Others, you couldn't hear anything from them.
Mhm.
Um, but then in private, they'll be the ones that were crying so much in private.
Yeah,
So I never really realized that we all grieve differently.
right.
You think that there's like a kind of standard way of grieving, but we all do grieve
No,
differently. So
it's very
if you see,
individual, very
yeah,
individual.
if you see someone not crying in public or at a funeral or at a loved one, do not think they're not grieving, and that is
Absolutely. That's
huge.
important to know.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception that if you see someone not crying, you're like, oh my god, that person's not sad about
You're not sad, yeah.
about their spouse, about their daughter, about their son, about their father, about their mother. It's not true. So we all grieve differently, and I've seen this through experience. Even in Majalis Imam Al Hussain alayhi salam, you'll see
Yes,
some people crying very loudly. You'll see some people like underneath their abaya, very quietly crying. You see others that are perhaps not even crying at all, and you're probably looking at them thinking, why are they not crying?
judging them too.
Yeah. So you don't know the way people grieve. Everyone grieves differently. Some people can never cry loudly in front of everyone. They
Yeah,
just can't. But
yeah,
they perhaps still are grieving inside. So first of all, it's kind of that outward way of grieving. Some If you don't see someone outwardly crying, it doesn't mean they're not grieving. They perhaps
absolutely.
are grieving. We don't all need to scream in front of everyone and cry. That's number one. And so even within the same family members, same siblings, it could differ. And so, as I said, some people need to express their grief very openly. That's how they express it. Some people don't. But
Has to do with personality as well. If perhaps you're an introvert or an extrovert in terms of how you interact with and engage yourself with the world around you.
definitely,
Or sometimes they may not matter in those moments. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And so the question is, in terms of crying in general, I think crying is very healthy, and it is. It's okay to cry when someone passes away. In fact, it's very healthy to cry. It's an outlet of your emotions. But if someone doesn't cry, you could
Okay, too.
grieve and not cry at the same time. But in
Exactly.
many, yeah, in many cases, it's healthy to cry, even if it's in private or in public. It's healthy to do it.
Exactly. And some emotional symptoms of grief could be shock and disbelief, the sadness, guilt, fear, anger, and sometimes physical symptoms um, could include, fatigue, nausea, lowered immunity, weight loss or weight gain, aches and pains, insomnia. So these are common normal things that could happen, and just because you don't experience them doesn't mean you're not grieving, and just because you are experiencing some or all, that's okay. And that's really important to understand, because sometimes
Yeah.
people, like you said, Zahra, is that sometimes it doesn't look like they're grieving. We're judging in our minds that, oh, they're not sad, they're not they're not dealing with this, they're not sad that this person is gone. And I really like what you said, that even at the majalis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, sometimes people are not showing what perhaps another person is, with the wailing and screaming, and someone quite silent or no expression at all. But everybody grieves differently. So my
Yeah.
next myth, Zahra, is grieving should last about a year. What are your thoughts on that?
There's definitely no timestamp on grief, and that's
Yeah.
what I've kind of learned. And I think at the beginning, when I was going through it, I was like, when does it get easier? I kept asking people, like, when does it get easier? And then I realized there's no end. There's no end to grief. Um, so there's no year or more than a year. Even sometimes with even the expression of grief, I remember people were saying in our culture, for a year, someone wears black. In our culture, it's like as if grieving should take a year or 6 months or this month. There's no timestamps on griefs. I personally feel now that I've realized that there's no kind of timestamp. You can't say it gets easier now, it gets easier then, it gets easier. People told me when my father first passed away, they said after a couple of months it gets easier. I, in fact, found that it gets actually harder. It
Harder.
gets
Yeah.
harder than it was when it initially happened. Because when it initially happened, I was just there with him. I hugged him, I kissed him, I saw him. But in a sense, now it's been months. It's the longest I've ever been away from him. I've never been away from him
Oh,
for
God
this long.
bless you.
And I think the longing for them, the aspects of longing for them, it gets harder.
Yeah.
So I believe that we shouldn't say that grieving will last about a year. We should wear black for a year. We should just mourn. And then after that year, suddenly everything goes away. It's definitely a roller coaster. There will be triggers down the line. Even my mum, when we went to bury my dad, we went past her home village where she was born, and and her mum used to work. My grandma used to make kohel, like the very natural, I'm talking about like 60 years ago, the very, very natural kohel. So she used to work and she used to make it. So we went past their house, and she and then one of my cousins said, oh, do you remember our grandma used to make kohel here? And my mum just cried. And it's been like 40-50 years since her mum passed away. Not 40-50. Yeah, 50 years. Yeah. It's been my mum lost her mother in her 20s. Yeah. It's been about 50 years since my grandma passed away.
Yeah.
Allah yarhamha. So grief, there's no timestamp. It doesn't just last a year and then it ends after that. It could be 40 years down the line, and then you go past the place where, for example, you spent time with your father or your mother or your spouse or your children, and it could trigger that emotion of grief again. So it's definitely, I wouldn't say. And now I've accepted that this feeling will perhaps, you carry on with your life. Yes, you carry on, you go out, you do but you will go through moments where that grief may come back again, and that's okay. You just deal with it. You just deal with it and move on. Yeah.
And so I want to explain the ball and the box theory when it comes to pain. So I don't know if you've heard of this, Zahra. You come across this yet?
I don't think I have, no.
No? Okay. So imagine a big ball, and a box, and a red button inside of this box. Okay. So grief is like this. You've got that box, a pain button, and the ball fills up the box. Okay. So what happens in the beginning, that ball is huge inside of the box. You can't move the box without that ball hitting the pain button, because it's enclosed in the edges of that box, right? So it rattles around on its own there, and it hits that button, the pain button, over and over, and you can't control it. It just keeps hurting, and sometimes very unrelenting, right? So what happens over time, that ball gets smaller and it hits the button less. So when it does hit, it hurts just as much. It's better because you can function day to day more easily. But the downside is that the ball can randomly hit that button when you least expect it. So for most people, that ball never really goes away, which is what we're talking about here. The pain of grief never goes away, but it might hit less and less. So you have more time to recover between those hits, unlike when the ball was still huge inside that box, right?
Mm,
So this is a really interesting description of grief that went viral on social media a few years back, but there's also that concept of it, right? Where you describe the ball as being big or small inside of that box. It's still there, but it
mm,
depends on how much it hits. Another analogy used in psychology is we talk about how it's still there, but your life around it, the pain, you become more functional in your daily life around the pain of that ball, so to speak, right? Um, and you get used to doing the things you need to do, but it's still there. People think it's gone, but it's still there, which is why we say there's no specific time.
yeah,
50 years for your mother, right? With her mother. It could be for people that, especially people, um, I don't know, I've heard people say that they're in contact with their loved ones through dreams, through imagery, through visions, which helps them a lot, right? And it's interesting how you said, oh, you should wear that black for a year, because traditionally in our cultures, you're supposed to wear that black for 40 days minimum at least, or 6 months, or then a year. And then they have these arba'in, which is what, 40 days after the
yeah,
deceased, and then the year. And then people bring clothes during this time to wear black. And then they come a year later to bring clothes of color. So it's really fascinating to see how different cultures
yeah,
honor the loved ones, but also that process of grief. Have you ever noticed when we have these majalis for the funerals, right? How almost dramatic they are in their expression of grief when women first walk in and they start doing latam and they're showing their azat to the person who's lost it, like they're showing their expression of sadness. I remember seeing this in Iraq years ago, and growing up here and going there and seeing it is different when you attend majalis and when you see the loss of somebody, right? It's so
mm,
interesting how people express that grief, and over time, like we said, the pain is there, but because you become distracted in what you have to do in life, it won't hit that box as much. But
mm,
definitely the grieving process, whether it is the week after or 40 days, 6 months, a year, however long, that can really help people along as well culturally when you have that. Like I saw that personally with family when they have these gatherings in honor of the dead, or, they would do anything for people to remember their loved ones, and du'as and the thawab of the food that they give out. People are just giving and giving for the thawab of their loved ones.
mm.
That can really help as well. What are your thoughts on that before we wrap up shortly?
Definitely, I think there's certain things that we can really do to help. Like for example, reciting Quran. Oh my God, that really helps in the process of grief. Honestly, from experience, like the minute you open up Quran and you read it for them and you recite it for them, it just there's something about it. And
It's a
I tell
healing. Yeah.
anyone I tell anyone that kind of has lost any loved one, just read, recite for them, remember them, even holding majalis in their name. These
Yes.
things really bring a comfort to the soul. I remember when just before my dad was buried, we spent like half an hour or an hour with him just before he was taken into the grave. And I remember I held like his leg where because all the family members were around him, so I was next to his leg, and I literally like held onto his leg and I read the all Surah Yasin, and I just felt like so much calmness and so much comfort. I cannot explain it. And um and I said from that day on that Quran is going to be my coping mechanism because it brings so much
Mm.
comfort. So I can certainly agree that holding majalis for a loved one really does bring peace to the heart. It makes it easier to cope with. Um, reading Quran for them, the certain supplications that you can read for a parent that has passed away or a loved one that's passed away. These things really bring comfort, and not only that, they receive it. So
They
they
receive
will
it.
receive
Yeah.
it. They
Thawab
will,
for them.
yeah, they will know so and so has read this, so and so has read that,
Mm.
and they reap the rewards for it. So it's I think that is perhaps one of the most the best coping mechanism. And also about just going back to people kind of lamenting and crying. I think we have to, as a community, kind of move away from the fact that this is the only form of grief.
Yeah.
Because I remember being in a funeral a year ago, and someone had lost their husband, and the wife wasn't crying. And I actually remember someone saying, "Oh my God, she's not even sad that her husband's
Yes.
passed away.
It's such
She's
a
not
harsh judgment.
yeah, she's not expressing any grief. She didn't even cry." And I was thinking, back then, I didn't even think about death or about grieving. But back then, it was like, "Oh, okay, that's it." I don't even know. But thinking back now is like, how can people judge someone about how much they are grieving for someone, a in regards to how they show it publicly. You know, some people, they lament and they cry in public, some people don't. So as a community, next time you attend a funeral, don't try to look at the expressions of the loved ones and say this person is grieving, this person isn't, because you honestly never know.
You never know. And one of our audience members is saying, I feel with deep pain and sadness since my mother died in 2020. My life is empty with no goal. Oh, I have to comment on this personally. For a long time now, as we're getting older and I look at my parents aging, I wonder when their time is coming. And it brings such a choke and a sadness to my heart when I think about that. And I've had dreams of my mother. I'm getting emotional now, but I've spoken to her about this. And then she laughs at me and says, Mama, we're all on this path, you know, and she tells me what she wants. Like when we went to the burial site of her cousin, she goes, listen, this is what I want you guys to do. Don't send me to Iraq. Okay, here's the money. Here's my kefan. And we're like, what? But look how it's normalizing it. But then I see we're going to have to deal with this. And I see a lot of people
Yeah,
who've dealt with the loss of a parent and especially somebody you're so close like you are, Zahra. And it's just like, I just got choked up thinking about, and here I see, you know, the sister saying that
yeah.
deep pain and sadness and loss. What can we say to that? What can we, you know, say to that? Because if you feel like your life is empty with no goal, remember what your goals are in our life is to
Mhm.
be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Definitely.
Perhaps
That's
this
it.
grief is a way to help you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to find a connection. Like Zahra, you know, where you were saying how for you, your solace was in the Quran, to
Mm,
give that hadiyah to your father's soul as thawab. I can't help but think when you do that, this is also a way to stay connected and keeping his memory alive in a beautiful way as a
yeah.
goal, right?
Yeah, I know. I definitely can sympathize with the viewer that wrote that, because once a parent does pass away, it does feel like your life honestly has ended,
It's
and it has.
ended.
Because our life since we were born is our parents, and then that part of our life it ends. Like our journey with our parents has ended. Like
The physical journey.
the physical journey. Yeah. So it's kind of surreal that the person that you rely on, because we rely on our parents for comfort, for support, for advice, for help, and
If you have
suddenly,
healthy relationships with them.
yeah, it's like they're our backbone, and then suddenly this just gets wiped away, and you feel like, oh my god, it has like a huge part of your life. And I always say this: I feel like when my father passed away, a huge part of me passed away with him.
Of
It died
course.
with him. So I do sympathize with the views, and so many people have messaged me. By the way, every time I put an Instagram post, I get like 10 messages from people that have also lost a parent.
Yes, because they're relating to you.
Yeah, so
Even right now, Zahra, as we're speaking, people are messaging. Like as we're talking about this specific part, they're messaging. One person is saying, "I have no support system over ever since my dad passed. I miss him so much. Please recite Fatiha." Yeah,
and I recite Al-Fatiha for all of those who have lost loved ones, and especially a parent, because your parents are your roots. So that kind of your beginning. This is what I felt when my father passed away. It's like your beginning, my whole beginning, my upbringing, everything is gone. Like I'm never gonna get that back. So
no, and we're not meant to get it back, Zahra. That's part of the what we're talking about is
mm,
the phases of our lives with whom we have and honoring and treasuring and you know, you hear the cliche, tell them you love them because you don't know when if you'll see them again. It just when you see somebody who passed away, when you hear of somebody who passes away, it hits you to think about these things and not just caught up in the rat race of the dunya, right? And
definitely,
so our last myth here is moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. What are your thoughts on that, Zahra? Because you're
that's what
talking
many
about
people,
that right now.
yeah, that's what many people feel, is like I can't move on, because if I move on, um, it's like I'm not honoring them. It's like I'm forgetting about their loss, but that's not true. And I think it's very important that we do carry on, because that's what our parents want during our lifetime. Our parents or a loved one, even a spouse or your children, we all want the happiness of our loved ones. We want to see them happy, and we have to remember, what would they want? Would our parents want us to just stay at home and be depressed?
And
Absolutely not.
agonize and be in agonizing pain
Yeah,
because they
my
feel
dad.
we've heard that they feel our pain. We say
Yeah,
that to each other. They feel our pain. They're
my dad
scared.
during his illness, when we were like kind of sad, he used to look at us like, "Why are you? Don't be sad. Like, why are you sad?"
Bless
And
him.
now, like when he passed away, I'm like, if he saw me, like, if he saw me the way I cried, or the way I didn't even want to talk about what I done when I saw him first time I saw him in his coffin, but he would not accept that. He would
Right.
not accept me being
Right.
so sad, so depressed, so like very down. So we have to remember that they want the best for us. So in terms of honoring them, and plus we're their children, we need to continue their honor. We need to
Santi.
continue for them. So every time now, like doing this program going, and I've done a couple of programs after my father passed away, even television programs, I've gone into the studio. I'm like, I'm honoring in his name. I'm doing this in his name. So any good that we do, they receive it. And I always say now, anything I do, I say, any goodness I do, may he get the reward. Any
God
shortcomings
bless
I have, may those shortcomings come to myself. But we need to continue in their name. So every time you do something, for the viewer that wrote in and said, I just can't continue, anything you do, do it, and just do it with your mother in your mind, to honor her, to continue. Have, use her as your strength to continue in life, just like we use them as a strength in this world. They've passed on, and we have someone on the other side. We have someone that is under God's ultimate mercy and blessings, and is, so use that to your advantage. Even we have narrations that the dua that you give at the gravesite of your parents are accepted. So if you have any du'as that you need, go to the gravesite of your mother or your father and pray. They are accepted. They can be our intercession from this world to the closeness of Allah, inshallah. So
It reminds me when you said that when we go to ziyarah and the presence of these people that are so close to God, how your dua and ziyaras are accepted. Look at the emphasis put upon our parents here, subhanallah, in
yeah,
comparison. Yeah.
yeah,
And Zahra, you mentioned the word depression, which is really important. I think we need to touch upon this before we wrap up, is understanding the difference between grief and depression, right? The depression is that constant feeling of sadness, which is from that chemical imbalance in the brain, right? So we know there's different types of depression, and sometimes people can feel the symptoms briefly over a long period of time. And so there's emotional influences like stress that don't necessarily cause the major depressive disorder, but they can intensify it, right? So this type of depression, we treat it with medication and therapy and so on and so forth. But complicated grief, on the other hand, this we know is caused by the death of someone close to you. And what we've heard from our audience today and from you, Zahra, and sometimes it's called the persistent complex bereavement disorder, which is stronger than normal grief. And so many people go through these several stages of grieving after losing that loved one. And sometimes people have trouble moving on for months or years or even longer. And so these folks could, avoid social contact. They lose motivation to do daily tasks, wishing that they have died too. So it's really important to recognize the difference between that depression and when it comes to grieving. But also, as Muslims, I would say we have the advantage of our faith that teaches us how to cope and understand with death, gives us strategies, gives us a support system. And for those who are struggling, those who've said that they don't have a support system, you do, inshallah, through these types of programs where people are sharing openly, they're talking about it, whether with humor, with, choked hearts, but to normalizing grief and learning how to cope and grieve in a way that makes sense for you. Because like we said right from the beginning, everybody grieves differently. Everybody experiences depending on what kind of death you are experiencing in your life, they will experience the result of that differently. My dear sister Zahra, God bless you. God bless your loved ones. God bless your father. I know personally I was hit by your loss when I was in Iraq and remembered you deeply there, and it was just amazed at the day your dad did go to ziyarah after all. Subhanallah. And I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of ISIA for your time and sharing this. And I know those who are listening now, as well as who will listen after, will benefit from this. God bless you, my dear Zahra. Thank you so much for your time, your reflections, your tears, your laughter, all of your experiences. And I pray that this helps you as well in your grieving process. And may Allah have his mercy and blessings upon your father and all of our loved ones. Thank you so much, Zahra, for joining us today. God
Thank
bless
you.
you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Any
And my
final words? Any final words?
final words is my condolences to everyone. I've just realized that a lot of people have lost a loved one, and very recently. So it's my condolences go to them. I hope that everyone is able to navigate through their loss and through their grief. And inshallah, we, with their strength and their remembrance of our loved ones, we come out stronger, inshallah. So if
Inshallah.
anyone, and I would just want to say, if anyone is struggling, do not be afraid to reach out. Honestly, there's always someone that you
Absolutely.
can speak to, and don't feel like you can suffer or you can feel pain or
Alone. Yes, we're here. Inshallah, if we can't do it, we'll absolutely connect you with resources to talk to somebody. And I'm sure there's lots of support groups out there. I know here in my city, we have support groups for people, right? Um, and in our communities, perhaps centers, it's just a suggestion to put out there. Perhaps there are some people who could take on doing grief groups. I think it's really important because we've actually had that here at my clinic where I work. We've had grief groups for people and having somebody who's a specialist in that area because
yeah,
nobody's going to know your pain unless you are with somebody who's experienced such a pain and you can share together and give and be there for each other and understand that, right? Because life does go on, but you feel like it has stopped, and so it's important to connect with the appropriate resources and bless those who are sharing that. And just to wrap up, again, thank you so much, Zahra. God bless you. And
thank
just
you.
in conclusion, for our viewers who are watching, in terms of how to deal with that grieving process. Like we said, it is an inevitable part of life. And there are so many different ways of coping with it that we've spoken with in terms of coming to terms with the grief and eventually finding a way to pick up the pieces and move on with your life. It's important to acknowledge your pain, validate your pain, not deny and push it away, right? That's normal, it's common. Accept that grief can trigger many different unexpected emotions in you, and that's normal, it's common again, and it's important to validate and understand that as well, right? Because a lot of people feel that you're supposed to be a certain way. So the
Mhm.
idea here is no, you don't need to be a certain way, that there are going to be a variety and a plethora of emotions, right? And
Yeah,
understand again that we've been saying all along that your grieving process will be unique to you. It doesn't have to be a copy, cut, paste type of thing of everybody else. And like Zahra was saying earlier, with her, all of her sisters and her siblings, everybody responded so differently, even though they're similar genetics, right? It's important also to seek out face to face support from people who care about you. I know now in the world of the pandemic that we're living in, quite challenging. And a lot of people have lost their loved ones and had not been able to be there as well during this time, right? So it's important to connect if you can face to face or reach out to virtual supports as well and support yourself emotionally. This is important by taking care of yourself physically as well, right? I know it's hard. You don't feel like eating, perhaps, or perhaps you're overeating. It's important to create still the routines that you had before in terms of trying to sleep well, to exercise, to keep the routines that keep you going. And I've had lots of conversations with people where that has been helping them get back to normal life, so to speak, right? And understanding to recognize the difference between grief and depression, like we touched upon. And it's important to get the support. Reach out, go to your medical doctor, go talk to a therapist, reach out to us, inshallah, and we'll connect you with appropriate resources as well. Thank you again to our dear Zahra. Thank you to all of our viewers who are very open in sharing their experiences, their thoughts and emotions. And we pray that this session today was helpful to you, and we'd love to hear back from you, feedback, and we'd love to hear of ideas that you'd like for us to explore, and also discussions with different people that we have in our communities. May Allah have his mercy and blessings upon Muhammad and Ali Muhammad and upon all of your loved ones. And please Al-Fatiha for the recent marhumeens and for all of our past ones. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.